I don't think you're ready to go public.
In the firm's history, we've done a free, what we call listings analysis for anybody that comes to us.
Joe Lucosky, founding partner of Lucosky Brookman. His energy is infectious and his knowledge is very much appreciated.
We want to work with the right companies. We want to work with the right people. We're not looking to do every deal and grab every dollar like some of our competitors. We really, really do care. Can we pick the right companies from bad companies? Absolutely not. But what I know is people. And I can look at someone and say, hey, are you looking to go public for the right reasons? That's really the key for me. Is it just to, hey, raise a bunch of money and you have no real plans and you're in a hot industry?
Good afternoon and welcome to the podcast. So today is an exciting first because we're recording live in a studio here in New York City. Typically we do it out of Long Island. And I am super excited for our guest today. And as soon as you hear him begin to speak, you'll understand why his energy is infectious and his knowledge is very much appreciated. So Joe Lucosky and I, we swim in the same waters, and we have for about 20 years. And it's funny because when I tell people that they're going to come onto the podcast as a guest, I give everybody the same instructions. And I say, just consider it as if it's a conversation amongst two buddies who have known each other for 20 years. And let's just see what happens. And in this case, it actually is true. Joe and I go back probably close to 2 decades. And with that introduction, Joe Lucosky, founding partner of Lucosky Brookman. Joe, thanks for taking the time.
Yes, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here, and congratulations on all the success you've had, not just in business and the industry, but certainly on this podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And it's only because of the great guests that we have that make it happen. So let's dive right in. Why don't you give us a snapshot of the firm in its current form today? And then what I'd love to do is go back and see what that journey looked like. And then we'll get into the exciting stuff about IPOs and listings and raising capital. What is Lucosky Brookman today?
Sure. Well, today, as you know, we are, one of the leading firms in the emerging growth and microcap space. And we've grown to about 100 people in a number of offices, mostly concentrated here in the Northeast, but we're pushing 70 plus attorneys, 30 plus support staff. And again, we are really hyper-focused primarily in the emerging growth space and the capital markets, part of the industry. But we also have grown to other industries and other practices like white collar, litigation, employment. We have a big insurance group. So we've tried to diversify our practice areas to really wrap around the capital markets needs of our clients. So it's not just, hey, you're a financing boutique or you're doing IPOs. We can really do a full suite of services for our entrepreneurial and founder-focused clients who, run emerging businesses and want to grow, and, things come up, and we are a trusted resource for them in a lot of areas.
Congratulations on your success. I mean, that is no small feat. And it's funny, if I think back, don't hold it against me. I too went to law school and gave it a shot, was not able to accomplish what you did. But I think that if somebody asked me to describe you and your practice, and I think you've described yourself like this as well, is that you're a quarterback. And from my perspective, a quarterback is not just somebody who, is able to score, but you have a different view of the playing field. So with that being said, what do you say is just give us a snapshot of the capital markets today. What are you seeing? And then we'll look under the cover and we'll get into some of the nitty gritty of it.
Sure. Well, that's a great question because I get asked this all the time.
I'm sure you do.
And I think about this all the time as an active capital markets lawyer. I mean, I think about this question almost nonstop, late at night, early in the morning. It's actually really funny. The markets had changed so much over the last 5 years. And specifically in 2025, the exchanges have passed a number of new rules and regulations and interpretations and guidance on what they're going to allow and what they're not going to allow. And it all culminated in December of 2025 with the new discretionary rules that NASDAQ really passed and have been implemented. The New York Stock Exchange has really been doing that for quite some time, just in a little bit of a different manner. But the playing field, the game has changed dramatically. And no longer can you just be, tangentially involved in the industry or a consultant floating around or a box checker. I mean, you need somebody who, like I say, is a quarterback who has persistence and resilience and competitive stamina to get a deal through the process. Because if you don't, you're going nowhere fast. it is a totally changed game. And not just that you have to have persistence, but you have to understand why the rules are being passed, how they're being implemented, and most importantly, how do you get your client or your deal through that process in an efficient way, without pissing people off, without being a wild person. We have to be professional. We have to go through the process, but the speed at which you go through that process and the know-how getting through that process, I think is a competitive advantage. And for those people in the industry who think it's 2025 or 2021 and deals are just going to get done because you have a public flow or shareholders equity, those days are over. That is done. It is a new landscape, and you have to be much, much more proactive.
I want to focus on a key word that you said that I think I have seen you put to practice, and I think actually describes you pretty well. And that word is relentless. You and I have shared many deals over the last 2 decades, everything from IPOs, SPACs, uplists, secondaries, you name it. I think we've done it, and I'd say definitely more than a handful of times, it's 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night, you're texting, like, we got to get this done. You're reaching out to NASDAQ. And to your credit, I think that a lot of times I've witnessed where the doors have already been closed. Like either the SEC said no to something or NASDAQ said no to something. And you're like, no, I'm getting this deal done. How do you find that relentless? And how do you, like you just mentioned, how do you balance that fine line between being too aggressive, too demanding, and yet being relentless that produces results?
Sure. It's really a fine line, and it's an art that took me many years. Really, it's okay because you have to be relentless enough to not give up, not be worried or awkward or feel bad when someone says no. Generally, the word to me in the professional context, no doesn't really mean no. No just means not right now, right? Because eventually you can get to a result if you stay at it long enough, if you work at it long enough, if you know the right people, if you can do the right analysis. So relentless is a must, especially in this industry. I mean, I was being relentless years ago when, it was a lot easier. Now, actually, being relentless and having that competitive stamina is a real advantage because we're even getting calls from other law firms and other lawyers, even competitors saying, hey, can you help us as special counsel get some things done that, people are saying are never going to happen? And, we consider those engagements, and look, we're friendly to everyone in the industry. And oftentimes we can get those deals done. We specialize. I say this all the time. No deal is easy, especially now. But we really do specialize in getting results in really difficult matters. Now, I always joke with people. I said, I'd love for someone to send me an easy deal once. Like everything doesn't have
Just
to
once
be.
in a while.
Yeah, everything doesn't have to be in the deathbed, right? And then we have to resuscitate it. And we do have a lot of deals with that, like that. And we do have a lot of friends and clients in the industry. But being relentless is super important. I'll say one other thing that I have talked about for many years, and that is this. When you're in a professional setting and you really do focus on results, remember our motto at Lucosky Brookman is relationship focused, results driven. We've been that way for 15 years. But in order to focus on the results part, you have to really not get deterred or upset, when things don't go your way. You have to take a step back, pivot, recalibrate, and then proceed on because it's never over till it's over. I tell clients that all the time. People have come to me for years with deals. They said, this is impossible. We can't do it. 3 other lawyers said it's not happening. We had a consultant that said the sky is falling, and then we get it done, right? We're not that much better than everyone. We're just relentless, and we continue to move forward even in the face of great adversity. It's never over till it's over. And I like to train my young associates, and I believe this myself. If you're going to be successful, you have to really adopt the mentality of a 6-year-old. And I tell my kids this all the time.
Okay.
And here's why. Because what do 6-year-olds do? You tell them no, they're going to do something, you say no, and 2 seconds later, they're going back to doing it. They just don't hear the word no. They don't fear rejection. They don't get awkward or upset or embarrassed when someone tells them something they don't want to hear because they have a one-track mind at 6 years old, and they continue to achieve the result, whether it's getting some candy or going outside or not taking a nap. Well, same thing in a professional setting. Just because someone says no, or I don't think so, or hey, we can't do this, there's always a way to do it the right way. You pivot, you recalibrate, and then you proceed forward to get that result. So think like a 6-year-old.
Let me ask you this. You mentioned the word relentless. One of the words that I think that goes along with that, which you mentioned previously, is stamina. I think that there's stamina in getting the deal done so that there's no deal fatigue. There's stamina in having a law firm that has survived the ups and downs and all the fun and games that comes along with that. Um, and also, I'm going to reveal something. I know you like to keep your personal life out of the spotlight, but when it comes to stamina, you're also a Ironman triathlete,
Half Ironman.
half
I've done a
Ironman.
couple
As if that's
74
like not worth mentioning. Half Ironman requires just as much stamina. How'd you get into that? What is that like? Like, what's the mental struggle? And do you see any comparison when you're talking about like just pushing through till we finish London?
Yeah, so years ago, as you can imagine, when we started the firm, we used to be in the office literally every day for 14, 15 hours. We used to, Seth Brookman and I, we would get to the office in the morning. We'd go to one place by the office for lunch every day. We'd come back. We'd go to one place every day for dinner, a different place. And we would do this literally for 5, 6 years building the firm. And, we had a lot of success because we were working to build a firm and build a client base and gain people's trust, and with that comes obviously being out of shape and weight gain. So about 5, 6 years ago, really before COVID 2018, I said, hey, look, if we're going to do this long term, we have to, be able to keep up with the industry and keep up with deals and have the stamina.
Right.
So I said, you know what? I'm going to do something that's just big and scary and that I've never done before and most people don't do. I'm going to go do a Ironman 70.3. So I signed up for one.
Crazy.
6 months later, I finished and completed an Ironman 70.3.
Unbelievable.
And I'll tell you that training for that was really eye-opening because, look, it's a big, scary goal. I'm not a runner. You can tell I have more of a linebacker.
You are a football player.
Body. I work out with some weights. But really, it's about, challenging yourself mentally and doing hard things. If you can do hard things and do them well and not give up and have that grit and perseverance to get through something in your personal life, that translates very well, in my opinion, to your personal life. So to your professional life. If you can do hard things in your personal life, that translates, I think, very well to your professional life. So when roadblocks occur or people say you have to quit or it's not going to work, you can find the energy and the stamina to really push through, to pivot, redo an analysis, and figure out if something can work. And that motto has really served us well because we have done so many things that, industry observers and others said couldn't be done, shouldn't be done, won't be done. And we have been successful in those types of engagements.
It's funny. A lot of people, as I'm sure they ask you, they've asked me, like, what to look out for in business when they launch a company or what should they be aware of. Nobody talks about the weight gain. I remember, and you probably remember also, back in 2002, 3, when Shyster and I were running Vintage Filings, we were on top of La Marais, which for those of you who don't know is a great kosher steakhouse. So we had the 3rd, 6th, and 7th floors. And so we would be ordering, by 11 o'clock, we'd have like some spring rolls, steak for lunch, some sushi for when clients came over in the afternoon, go out for dinner. And I was like 40, 45 pounds heavier back then. And, but whining and dining is part of the growth process.
And I know Shy, so you guys eat and drink very well.
We very much enjoy. But let's talk about growing a business and what it takes. So, I find that there's a certain DNA that has to exist in a person when they are ready to start a company or a firm. For me, I was a practicing attorney and I got like 2% of the business that I brought in. And after a while, I was like, 1 second, I'm doing all the work. I have to bring in the clients. I'm responsible. I have to collect. I may as well start my own firm. That was my mindset to getting into the business world. For you, as I understand it, you came from big law. What was the impetus to say, I'm going to give this a shot at my own place?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to know the managing partner of the firm that was paying you 2% because I think I'm overpaying. Okay,
There's a long time.
Our pay structure is a lot better than that. But
Right.
but in all seriousness, you're right. Look, I went to Brooklyn Law School, which is a local law school here in New York City. Did phenomenally well because you had to if you wanted to go into big law.
Right.
Was on law review, the whole thing. I started my career at Cahill Gordon, which is a big Wall Street firm doing big sponsor-backed deals, leverage buyouts, working with the big bulge bracket banks. It was a great training ground for 5 or 6 years. And I really did that, very intensely. I mean, you're talking about billing, 25, 26, 2,800 hours every single year for 5 or 6 years. It's kind of like, the more you work, the better you become. It's a lot like Kobe Bryant. When Kobe was training, he would train 5, 6 times a day or 4 or 5 times a day, and he would just get that much better beyond this competition. Well, for me, that's the way I looked at Big Law. You get on every deal, you do as much as you can, you work with as many people as you can, you learn from everybody. And not just things that, you should do right. Sometimes you learn what you shouldn't do by observing the right people and making mental notes. It was a great training ground. And then from there, I went to another ad law firm called Seward and Kissel, and really helped build their transactions group, representing tons of funds and pipes and other transactions, structured deals, hybrid deals. Again, getting a different type of experience. And it's funny because when I left Seward and Kissel to go to a smaller New Jersey firm before we started Lucosky Brookman, it really was with the attitude and the incentive to really come into an emerging space, a microcap space, although I didn't really know it back then, to really work more closely with founders and entrepreneurs, people who are at the heart of their businesses and want to grow it, want to raise capital, want to elevate and scale. Those things are very exciting to me because look, when you're in big law and you're working on a big project with Goldman Sachs, which I've done many, or Morgan Stanley or JP Morgan, they don't really care what you have to say.
Right.
The deal is the deal. They want you to do a good job, review the documents. Maybe the senior partners are giving, real advice, but there's nobody under 10 years in big law giving any advice that anyone cares about at these, big banks and big LBO shops. So I wanted to be closer to the entrepreneur, really advise them, give them, my experience and help them get through tough times. So that was it. We started Lucosky Brookman in December of 2010, officially launched in February of 2011, which is actually funny because at the time, we're young, dumb and stupid, didn't really know any better. We said, we're going to launch the second Monday of February. Nobody looked at the calendar, and it turned out to be Valentine's Day. It was on that Monday.
Okay.
So we go into work, we open the doors, and someone says, hey, by the way, it's Valentine's Day. Are you guys staying late? So I ended up being launching the firm on Valentine's Day 2011. And then later that next year, we came up to our firm anniversary. It was, of course, Valentine's Day. It was the firm anniversary. And it also happened to be Staleness Day in the industry, which is a huge day for securities professionals in capital markets. Staleness from your vintage day, Edgar days, vintage day, transfer agent days. So now we're competing with, firm anniversary, Valentine's Day, Staleness Day for the industry. Every client wants to be on file, so they're not late. And I'll tell you one other thing. So many years later, February 14th, it was the only time it happened, I think, in the last 10 years. It actually fell on Ash Wednesday as well, was early. As a practicing Catholic, so I had another event on February 14th. So we had the firm anniversary, Valentine's Day, Staleness Day, and Ash Wednesday, all on the same day.
Wow.
In one of those years. So
Wow.
so we didn't do very, very well in picking it.
Well, you know what? Maybe it was fortuitous because it was on Valentine's Day, and here's my segue. You definitely have a love for what you do and a passion. And anybody who speaks to you about any of the topics related to securities and capital markets can tell that you have like an energy and a passion, both for the rules and the regulation and for the people involved. Let me ask you that. How much of your practice today, if you look at it today, as well as the journey over the last X number of years, how much of it is knowing the rules, knowing the regulations, and how much of it is really relationships and being able to have people reach you, relate to what they're going through? What would you say is the breakdown?
Yeah, this is another question that I've thought about for many years. And really, when we started the firm, we thought about this question. Look, being a competent lawyer is a must. You have to be. It's the foundation of what we do. Without it, we have nothing. So my big law training, most of my partners who are also practicing big law, that is great. Classically trained at some of the best firms in the world. But for us, that's just the beginning because deals don't get done because you know the rule. I mean, you've talked to a number, probably too many capital markets lawyers who can recite every rule of Regulation SK, but as soon as something happens, they can't pivot and redirect and get a deal done. It just dies in the rules. So for us, we knew right away, and we started the firm based on the concept of radical generosity. It really is something we thought about. We sat down and said, okay, how are we going to make our mark on this industry for the passion that we have in this founder-focused entrepreneur environment? We said, you know what? We're going to be relationship focused and results driven with a radical generosity. And what I mean by that is we're going to give our time to the industry. We're going to give our time to the referral sources and the clients. And we're not going to bill every second. We're not going to do 6-minute increments. We're not going to send, bills that are going to piss people off. We're going to, really take a long-term approach. Now, look, we want to get paid. We have to get paid. We do send bills, but we really try to distinguish between the difference between doing legal work and relationship time. And I think a combination of that relationship focused, results driven approach with the concept of being radically generous to the industry. And even today, with our data and all of the stuff that we do for the industry, shines through.
I was just going to say that, like, when you talk about that generosity, I think that it shouldn't go unmentioned that, you and I have been, I'd like to think we've been at the forefront of LinkedIn for the last 5+ years. And it's got to work for whoever uses it, but it's clearly worked, I think, for both of us. And part of it is knowing that balance of when to be self-promotional, which I think is important. You want people to know that you're active and you're doing deals and who you're doing deals with. But some of it is, how can I use my knowledge or my education or my data and give it forward to the industry so that it's appreciated? You don't want to be, just pushing, hey, look how great we are. We're more cost effective down somebody's throat. You want them to appreciate the value that you bring to the table. I think that you've done a great job through LinkedIn with that data and with educating the industry, from professionals and bankers to startups and CEOs. How do you look at that data?
Well, I'll tell you, well, first of all, I got to thank you for the LinkedIn because
Thank you.
10 years ago, you and I were collaborating when LinkedIn wasn't even a thing.
Right.
And you had actually come to me. I remember this. I'm sitting in my office. You said, "Hey, look, I'm thinking about starting a LinkedIn business. You should talk to all of your clients and see if they want to understand, a little bit more about LinkedIn." And I turned to you and said, "Well, what about me?"
Yeah.
Right?
No,
First professional
that's
client.
true. And now you're like the go-to source.
Well, that was a very good education, you put me through and really opened my eyes to what was possible. But I'll tell you this on LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is a great source to, yeah, promote yourself. But for me, it's more than that. We do promote deals and, we're proud of our teams, we're proud of our clients. That's just a given. But for me, it's more of a platform to educate the community, really uplift the industry, and give away our data, which we hopefully will talk about in a few minutes, and what we do and why we do it, so everybody can use it. Everyone can make better decisions. We can really uplift each other. And that's really something that, we've done from day one, on a lesser scale in the early days, but now on a bigger scale, because the microcap industry, the emerging growth space, is really ignored. It's an underserved community by the big data aggregators and even the exchanges. They don't publish or promote really anything emerging growth. Now, they'll do the deals for the right ones, but it's not like they're a massive promotional campaign for those founders and entrepreneurs. So we try to fill that void with our data and give it away to the community and the industry and really try to make everyone better.
If we look at that data, let's slightly pivot to the IPO world, right? So now, and I'm sure you get this question all the time, hey, should I do an IPO? Should I do a direct listing? Should I do a SPAC? Should I do a reverse merger? What, and obviously every situation is different, but what advice do you give to those CEOs that are contemplating going this route? And I'm sure that there are some people that, and you and I both probably said this to them, it's like, I don't think you're ready to go public, and you're trying to do them a favor. It's not about us trying to get extra clients. It's about, like, I really think you're too early, or you have to, keep an eye out for this. What's your impression of when to tell which CEO, which version of process?
Well, that's a fantastic question. Something else we've done really early on in the firm's history is we've done a free, what we call listings analysis for anybody that comes to us. We don't charge. We don't need an engagement letter. Don't send us any money. Let us get some data from you. Let us look at your financial statements. Let us look at your pitch deck. Let us look at your projections, at your industry, all of those things. And let us put together a comprehensive custom analysis for you. We've been doing this for years and years and years. I hear stories about consultants and lawyers and everyone else. They won't lift a finger till a retainer is signed, a check is mailed. That's crazy. I mean, we want to work with the right companies. We want to work with the right people. We're not looking to do every deal and grab every dollar like some of our competitors. We really, really do care. And look, are we perfect? No. Can we pick the right companies from bad companies? Absolutely not. For every company that I think is going to be amazing, sometimes I'm sorely disappointed. For the ones that I think are never going to
Listen,
make
Joe,
it,
if I
they
totally
are
agree,
off the
if we
charts.
could pick which ones were heroes or zeros, we'd be investment bankers. We wouldn't
Yeah.
be doing what
Well,
we
I
do.
don't even know. I think we'd be like, have a crystal ball because I don't even think they know.
Right.
But what I know is people. And I can look at someone and say, hey, are you competitive? Are you ambitious? Do you care about your team and your people? Are you looking to go public for the right reason? That's really the key for me. Are you looking to go public for the right reason? Is it just to, hey, raise a bunch of money and you have no real plans and you're in a hot industry? Well, that's not so exciting. Do you really want to grow a business? Do you want to scale your company, advance your employees? Really those types of qualities. And if the company is ready and they have some metrics that, are what we call within striking distance, meaning their financials are pretty good. Maybe they have a shareholder base. Maybe they are in a hot industry and they have rapid growth, good projections. All of that taken together can make us then, in our analysis, feel comfortable that a company is within what we call striking distance. And then, if that's the case, we can then introduce them to a few banks or an auditor and really see if the process can continue. But you're right. A lot of times we tell companies, not often because you really can't tell a founder or an entrepreneur, hey, you're not ready. They don't want to listen. Whereas they're strong willed like you and I.
All right.
And that would, they just hang up the phone and go to someone else. So you got to really be careful how you say that. But I do think, once you can find in the analysis that a company is within striking distance, then that process can proceed. And we do that again gratuitously. It's generous. It's for the industry and also for ourselves to make sure we're doing the right diligence and the right homework to advance the cause of not just the business, but the ecosystem.
And do you find that, and again, it just depends on the issuer perhaps, or the appetite of the investment banking firms that are potentially going to fund this, but what would you how would you summarize the distinction between doing an IPO, a direct listing, or a SPAC? It's a big question to answer in a
No, it is, and I'll sum it up like this. I think SPACs are separate because the SPAC world is it comes and goes, and right now it's I guess coming again.
right. I don't know if it's
But
3.0 or
yeah,
4.0.
depending on how you look at
Through
it.
a lot of
But
different
we've done
iterations.
a number of SPACs, not as many as some of our competitors, but we've done a number of them. We like to think the right ones. Now, not all of them work. So SPAC, I think, is separate. Those, in my view, are really for larger companies with real substance and real credible, you know, uh, long-term valuations. So sort of putting that aside, the analysis that we normally do is between an IPO or a direct listing if you're private, or an uplisting or even an IPO, depending on how you're trading on the OTC. There's some quirky measures or metrics that you can see. You can do an IPO from the OTC depending on where you're reporting, how you're reporting. But the reality is this, and I'll sum it up like this. If you're just a private company, you have a few shareholders, but you have good financials and good prospects, you're probably going to want to explore IPO. If you're a company that's been around for a long time, you raised multiple rounds of financing, you have a larger legacy shareholder base, you're probably going to want to explore a direct listing because you're set up more fundamentally for that. Because remember, a direct listing is registering the already existing shareholders. Now, there's some structure that you can put into those deals where you can get the shareholders. I'm not saying you can't do that, but those are the general differences between an IPO and a direct listing. And like I said, we do that very in-depth analysis before we even, engage with clients.
And I'm gonna pretend for a minute that we're not doing a podcast and this is not being recorded, and I'm just gonna ask a selfish question of things that I've seen pretty recently. Because as VStock and as TransTrader, we do a fair amount of direct listings, and not a reflection in any way of the issuers themselves. A lot of them tank after they go public, and from my standpoint, I've heard, well, it's because they don't have an underwriter to support it, they don't have any aftermarket support.
Yeah.
Um, it takes a couple days to actually get the shares from the transfer agent via DWAC or DRS into the market so that they can, some of them might start at 30, go up to 50, and then they're at $11 or $7. So
Yeah.
can you explain from your perspective, why does that happen? And what do you suggest to companies? This is just a general question. Like, what do you suggest to companies on the IR side? You've seen hundreds of companies go public, and I'm sure you've seen too many tank and others do well. What do you think is the best advice for?
Yeah, it's another question I think about a lot because you're right. On the direct listings, they don't have an underwriter. There's no market stabilizing transactions occur, after the deal. They generally are not, you know, using IR right out of the gate. And they really have to find a way to get the word out. See, when bigger companies do a direct listing, there's, tens of thousands of shareholders. It's easier to do. When you're doing a direct listing in the emerging growth space and you have 500 shareholders, 600 shareholders, it's really hard to sort of get that word out. And so some of them do trade well. There's been good examples, but a lot of them, you're right, do sort of go down. It's a problem in the industry. I'll tell you, I've noticed that pattern as well. But what I think is for the right companies who have the right foundation and really continue to move forward and execute on their business, they can recover and eventually find their equilibrium or their sweet spot in the market. But it's a rough process. I mean, you have to balance, like I said, staying private, doing a direct listing, or trying to qualify now for an IPO under the much tighter, harder rules. So, um, direct listings are here to stay. They've actually been up this year in 2026, given where the IPO market is. But that's a process that has to get played out over time among the entire industry between IR, banking, legal, and the exchanges. Because remember, promotion is shareholder communication sometimes is a bad word.
Right.
But it's a necessary part of the process to get the word out. If you do it right, it can be effective, and you shouldn't do it wrong. And we very rarely get involved in the investor relations world. I think most lawyers don't.
Right. I would
Because
agree with that.
we don't, we don't really know that side of the business. And frankly, you want to be very careful in that side of the business.
How do you or are you able to prepare these CEOs for the Wild West journey that they're about to go on once they go public? Because up until this point, many of them have been focused on their business. They may be a biotech or pharma or electric vehicles, and they're true experts at what they do. And there's no IPO school. They just get thrown into, now you're a public company, you've got to deal with shareholders, you've got to deal with Qs, Ks, proxies, annual reports, conferences, presentations, and you're essentially wearing 2 hats, 3 hats, 12 hats. Do you sort of have any advice for how they're supposed to, A, learn the material on the fly, and then B, how do they balance all that?
Yeah, I say it all the time. I was speaking at NASDAQ at the IPO summit, which I know you were a part of last year. And someone asked this question. I said, very frankly, I said, look, every CEO, especially in the emerging growth space, has to wear 2 hats and have 3 full-time jobs. It's just the way
At
it is.
least, yeah.
And you really have to. So, it is hard, and it's a hard transition for most CEOs who want to just be operators. But I do find that, there's a couple different types of CEOs. There's the true operator who really has no idea about the public markets and don't want to have an idea. So they'll usually rely on their CFO for a lot of, experienced CFO on Wall Street for a lot of that sort of stuff. And then there's the CEO who can kind of balance both. And that's really, a good category as well. They want to run the business, but they also want to be involved and they want to learn about the rules and they want to understand how to function safely. And then there's the third category of CEO, which we don't really love and try to stay away from, which is they just care about being public and their stock price.
Right.
And all I want to know about is when they can raise money and where their stock price is. If a CEO calls you up 15 times a day on the stock movement from, $4 to 410 to 405 to 420, that's a bad sign. So that third category is not, someone that I would recommend is public for the right reasons.
Right. But it's interesting though, because I think you and I have lived through enough cycles where it used to be pump and dumps, and it used to be, newsletter blasts and email blasts and all kinds of shenanigans going on. But I feel like today, and I was not aware of this until like very recently, that has sort of moved with technology. So now there are bots out there that are planting messages on Reddit and on Twitter. And, I think that social media has taken the direction of public company stock trading. Everybody, what was that movie, Dumb Money, with people that are sitting in their basement that are trading stocks, and they have an opinion even though they only have 10 shares or something like that. So I think times are definitely changing. The rules are changing. Regulation is changing. You have spoken at a couple of conferences, and I know certainly on LinkedIn recently about a lot of the recent NASDAQ rule changes. Can you give us a high level overview of what those changes are and how they either impact a company that is already public or a company that's thinking about going public?
Sure. So you mentioned pump and dump. I think the new term, at least according to Bloomberg or one of Dow Jones, is rampant dump. I think that's a new term that
I've not heard that one.
very recently. Rampant dump. Well, it's a good point because this is why Nasdaq, or what's led Nasdaq, a primary catalyst to them sort of revamping the listing process, and it was necessary. I fully support that. I think Nasdaq has done a pretty good job in trying to balance elevating the industry and protecting the markets and providing access to capital. Now, how they play that out over time and implement that is yet to be seen because it is still a little clunky. It's a little awkward, and it'll get better over time. But really, what happened was in 2025, as you know, um, NASDAQ really changed their rules right in January of last year, 2025. And they said, look, you have to raise $15 million now unless you have net income for an IPO. The whole market went crazy and said, oh my gosh, there's never going to be another deal. But there were a lot of deals, right? And there were a lot of foreign deals who took advantage of that net income exception. And there was a lot of volatility in those deals from overseas. And then NASDAQ came back in the middle of last year and said, you know what? It's going to be 15 million for everyone. We don't care if you have net income, because a lot of times the overseas companies had net income and they were taking advantage of much smaller raises, 4 million, 6 million, 8 million. And those capital raises, they were smaller, tighter, and more volatile. And if you bring into the picture your point about social media and rampant dump and bots overseas, you can see how these stocks can be very volatile. So NASDAQ had to do something. So that all culminated in December of 2025 when they, out of the blue, literally out of the blue, on day one, implemented the new 5101-3 discretionary rules. So now they're going to look at your company, where you're located, your directors, basically give you a super background check, right? Diligence on the company. And their system has gone from a mainly rules-based system to now a discretionary-based system. So they can deny your listing even if you meet all the other criteria. So they can deny it for any reason or no reason at all, based on how they feel your company is ready or going to perform, or if there's certain things they just don't like or see based on their data analytics. So that's a little bit of the evolution for 2025. And really, that has changed the way we fundamentally do deals, because now you have to be so much more proactive. You have to start the process earlier. You have to really have that competitive stamina to mix it up early, get information from the exchanges, because they're not always forthcoming. They're working out their own rules. They're busy. They don't care about my deal, your deal, right? So you have to be able to be persistent to get that information. But the whole process is radically different. I believe it was a necessary upgrade. Not thrilled about some of the things, but I do think eventually this will elevate the entire ecosystem, and the data really proves that out.
You and I both work with, fortunately, companies from Israel, Japan, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Singapore, and I thought that for about 15 or 18 months there, it was super, super active. I mean, literally, I was doing, as I'm sure you were, I was doing Zooms at 6 in the morning, at 11 o'clock at night with, issuers from foreign countries. Do you feel like this has slowed down that appetite? Are people just on pause, or are they still moving forward, hoping for the best?
So let me give you some data, because I think this really highlights this point very well, Seth. And that is this. So in 2025, there were 100 and I think 42 microcap IPOs.
Press, you have no notes. This is all data off the
Yeah.
top of your head.
I love
Go ahead.
I eat, breathe, and sleep this stuff.
Okay.
This is all I do.
Okay.
So 142 microcap IPOs. Out of those, I think 82, 83% were foreign. From foreign jurisdictions. Think about that. Barely 15% domestic listing on our senior exchanges, the NASDAQ New York Stock Exchange. And a lot of those companies were the ones that NASDAQ, followed and had concerns about. Not all of them, but some of them. This year, in the first quarter of 2026, there were 5 microcap IPOs. 5. Okay. In 2025, there were 42 in the first quarter. So you went from 42 to 5, quarter over quarter, 2025 versus 2026. But here's the most interesting point. All 5 of those IPOs were domestic. not one foreign issue. Now, we happen to do 2 of those 5, in that, quarter, which was, a lot of hard work, a lot of perseverance, knowing the right people, understanding the new rules. How do you get, the deals through in a very persistent way, but a cautious way? Well, just think about that. The foreign market, as far as IPOs have gone, has absolutely collapsed. And that's not a coincidence. That is by design. This is what NASDAQ was concerned about. Now, under the new rules, they're finding their way to understand how to clear a company, how to evaluate a company under the 5101-3 rules. It's just taking some time now. We're working on, a number of foreign transactions, both in China, Japan, and other places. And it is definitely taking time, but, I'm hopeful that the exchanges will work out their internal processes and we will help them be a part of that to just make the ecosystem better and make the market safer.
That's actually great information. Not thrilled to hear those numbers. I mean, I know I'm in the weeds, but I don't think I realized that it went from 42 to 5. Not good news for my kids' college education funds, and so we also rely on a lot of IPO activity. One question that I've always had for you is from a perspective standpoint. VStock, as a transfer agent, we work with about 1,000 public companies, but we're always on the issuer side. You, to your credit, you work on the issuer side and on the underwriter side sometimes, representing the investment bankers that are taking these deals public. Being on both sides of it is like, how does that impact your ability to counsel the other side of the deal that you're on? Like, do you have that conversation with the issuers, the underwriters?
Well, listen, it's really an advantage. And I'll tell you why, because when we're on the underwriter side, we know everything the company and company counsel should be doing. So we see something that's kind of off or it's not proceeding at a pace that we think should be proceeding at, we'll say something. We're not shy. We want to help everyone get a deal done. So, a lot of times we're crossing over, not in a formal way as an engagement, but in a helpful way to make sure things are staying on pace. And certainly when we're on the company side, you know, um, we can, really educate and calm the CEOs or the founders down, if they're feeling a little bit uncertain because we know everything to expect on the banking side because we've been through it so many times. And I think we're really one of the only firms that, have this again, um, generous approach to a deal. We're not afraid to roll up our sleeves and get something done. Now, let me give you a good example. A lot of times we're on the underwriter side and company counsel struggles with either NASDAQ clearance or New York Stock Exchange clearance. And they're just, it's not their fault. They just have outsourced it for so many years. We've never done that. We've done all of our NASDAQ clearances, all of our New York Stock Exchange clearances. We don't outsource to consultants. I would never do that. You can't be a results-driven firm and be a quarterback of a process and, an ambassador to the ecosystem and outsource the most important part of a deal. I would never do that. So if we're on the underwriter side and we see the company counsel is struggling, we'll cross over and get involved and we'll say, hey, look, let us help you. Here's what you should do. Here's a tip. Here's something we would consider. Let's do it together in a non-threatening way. We're not trying to take anybody's clients. We're trying to make a deal happen, for everybody involved. And that's sort of been our approach, that it is a super amazing advantage to have been trusted by both sides of the ecosystem to represent them. And now it's just a huge competitive advantage for our clients.
I have a couple of sort of rapid fire questions to ask you, but before we get to that, is there anything else that you think would be valuable for our audience to understand about the current state of the market in terms of raising capital? What are some of the things that you're seeing right now that work, that don't work? Just to throw out some terms, I've seen ELOCs have become a little bit more popular, even though I think you might agree that a couple of years ago that was like a bad word because ELOCs automatically meant that there was going to be downward pressure on the stock. What are you seeing right now in terms of capital raising?
Sure. Well, let me answer that in two parts. The first part is on the initial listing side, capital raising in that sense. I think that, you have to really have somebody in charge of the process because deals aren't going to get done like they used to in the past. You can't just go through a process, check some boxes, and wait. It will never get done. So you need a quarterback. I'm fond of saying this. I say this all the time. I love to be in that position. My firm loves to be in that position. We train all of our people to be in that position, to really lead the process. And, you need a quarterback because, the process has changed so much. It's become too hard. You got to have a leader who wakes up every day and says, how are we going to advance this deal forward? Otherwise, your listing will get done. Flipping over to the secondary side, it's a little bit easier. Once you're public, you have a board, you have a CFO, you have a legacy investment banker. You're starting to get the hang of it, and deals come and go. Sometimes they'll be overnights, ELOCs, ATMs. I'll say this, the exchanges had also tightened the continued listing rules. They've cracked down on reverse splits. They've cracked down on bid price initiatives. They've cracked down on low price stocks. So it's not as if it's easy on that side of the fence either. And this is a transfer agent.
Right.
So I will say that you're right. ELOCs have come back, and we come back into vogue in some sense. We've been doing a number of them on the investor side and the company side. But I'll tell you something recently that happened that I think most people know about is the SEC changed some rules related to ATM offerings. And that's been a huge advantage now especially for microcap companies who, can now get above the $75 million test, have an ATM in place. And then even if they fall down below 75 million, which is the threshold to become, shelf eligible, you can still use your ATM in full, even if you become baby shelf. That's a huge advantage that just recently passed about a month ago.
Right.
So that's something that the microcap and emerging growth world is taking advantage of. And it's good because I really believe there's a huge disconnect between Washington and the SEC, making the rules easier, making them more company friendly, and the exchanges who are doing the opposite. They're tightening, they're making it harder. Again, for good reason. There's no judgment here. So this was a nice way for the SEC and the administration in Washington to really help out the emerging growth world.
Last but not least, if anybody wants to get in touch with you or Lucosky Brookman, what's the best way to go about doing that?
Well, I think you can go right to our website, which is lucbro.com. Which is a story behind how we came up with that website as well, but it's lucbro.com, no K, or really reach out to me on LinkedIn. I mean, LinkedIn is the preferred really method because we take LinkedIn very seriously. We're connected to, most people in the ecosystem. We educate the ecosystem, and, we're everywhere, you need to be.
Well, definitely reach out to Joe as a resource. And I call these fire questions, rapid fire questions, but really they're like clip moments because I'm just going to put you on the spot. And I truly believe that this is what a lot of our capital markets audience, it's on their mind, but they never have a chance to ask. The first one, what's the fastest way to kill an IPO before it even starts?
Wow, this is round fire. I think by, and I'll say this, and I believe this, not by having the right quarterback in place. Because if you don't have a leader who shows up every day to make sure your deal is advancing, it's going to go nowhere. It may not go nowhere in the first month or two, but when you get into that crunch time, it's not going to happen.
When somebody does do an IPO, a lot of times, unfortunately, I think that they do it because they think it's going to solve all their problems. In your experience, has that typically worked, or do you find that most of the companies that go public for the wrong reasons end up paying for it?
Yeah, no, it is a terrible idea. It never works. Okay. I don't think it has ever worked. If you're going public to just raise capital, be a lifestyle CEO, you don't really have a plan. That's a bad idea. If you're going public to solve all your problems, it's going to create more problems because now you have 3 full-time jobs and you have the scrutiny of the public markets, the SEC, NASDAQ, the auditors, public shareholders, plaintiffs' lawyers, all looking at you. So going public for the wrong reasons is never a good idea.
Right. It's like they say, you have to play it for the love of the game. If you're going for the wrong reason, it's not going to be too effective. What's one piece of advice that you give to people and they always ignore?
Oof, that's
because I'm sure you give a lot of advice to a lot of people.
I'm actually tired of hearing myself talk. It's actually really funny because when I go home at night, obviously my boys are still home. My daughters are at college, but I go home at night and I talk to my boys, and then my wife wants to talk to me. I love my wife; she's great. She's been so supportive over the years. I mean, phenomenal mother, supports the business. Lets me do what I need to do. But then she wants to talk to me. and I've been talking all day. And it's like, I don't want to talk to anybody. I want to hang out with my German Shepherd, and just relax. But, advice that people generally ignore. Wow, that's a good one.
I think for me, I always tell these companies like they've got to know their shareholders. Too often they just go about things and they have no idea. Like even in terms of the investors, knowing who the bankers are, who are the investors, who are the family offices, you've got to know who you're sort of partnering up with, and very often I'll act as Switzerland. I'll say, hey, you should know this about this firm, this about that firm, and sometimes they take the advice and
I'll give you, you know what I'll say this. This is kind of an odd one, but it happened to me recently. I always tell CEOs and companies, treat your auditors with kid gloves, okay? Because auditors have a really, really difficult job. I tremendously respect everything the auditors do. Now, do I love all of them or how uh, efficiently they either work or don't work or the pace of their work? No, but they got a tough job and we got to respect it. We got to like them do their thing. But I always tell CEOs, treat your auditors, with kid gloves, give them space, do things early so they can put it through their system and get things done. Don't go to them at the last minute. Don't go to them over a weekend or a rush job. It generally doesn't work out, especially in this regulatory environment. I will tell you, almost everyone ignores that advice. And then we get into a big cluster bomb 2 days before filing,
right,
or
right.
3 days before exchange listing, or
Oh.
or 3 days before a registration statement is due and penalties are going to accrue. And then there's this big fight with the auditors. So treat your auditors properly, treat them with kid gloves, give them space, and let them do their thing.
I think that's a great point. I remember all those years of doing the EDGAR filings, right, where you have the 10Q or the 10K. I still do it at 5 o'clock and 10 o'clock every day. So, invariably you'd have a company that shows up at 4:57 and they want to move a comma or add a zero or a one. And I'm like, oh, this has to be coming from the auditor. So no offense to the auditors out there, but they always are at last minute. And that's often a challenge when, like you had mentioned before, the staleness where everything has to run on its timeline. And if the orders are delayed, maybe not to any fault of their own, it might be the company getting them the information. But I know that responsiveness and timeliness is a big issue, to the point where somebody told me at one point that I should launch the audit. Don't worry, I'm not doing that. I'm not going that route. But Joe, this has been super helpful, super insightful. I think for companies going public, companies that are public, or even entrepreneurs in general that are looking to grow their company or their practice, I think you've given some great nuggets of data, and look forward to seeing your next post on LinkedIn.
Well, thank you, sir. I really appreciate being here.
Thanks, Joe.